The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty plains of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming territory. 1876. Sarah McKenzie stood on her porch, her weathered hands gripping a cup of bitter coffee as she surveyed the broken fence line that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. 6 months had passed since cholera took her husband Thomas, leaving her alone with their small ranch, 40 head of cattle, and a fence that seemed to mock her with every fallen post and tangled wire. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Sarah's auburn hair, streaked prematurely with silver from grief and hardship, caught in the breeze as she set down her cup with quiet determination. She had already lost 3 cattle through the gaps in the fence this week alone. The remaining posts leaned at dangerous angles, some split by weather, others pushed over by wandering livestock. Without that fence, she would lose everything Thomas had worked for, everything they had built together with their bare hands over 15 years of marriage. She walked to the tool shed, her boots leaving prints in the morning dew. Inside, she found Thomas's paint bucket, still half full of the white paint he'd mixed himself from limestone and linseed oil. The brush lay beside it, its bristles stiff with neglect. Sarah lifted the bucket, surprised by its weight, and carried it toward the fence line. She would start with what she could manage, painting the posts that still stood, making them visible to the cattle, buying herself time until she could figure out how to repair the rest. As she dipped the brush into the paint, memories flooded back. Thomas teaching her how to apply even strokes, his patient voice explaining that a well-maintained fence was the backbone of any ranch. Her hand trembled as she made the first stroke on the weathered wood. The paint went on thin, soaking immediately into the thirsty grain. She would need help, but asking for it meant admitting she couldn't manage alone, something her pride wouldn't easily allow. A dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing larger as it approached. Sarah shielded her eyes against the morning glare, watching as a lone rider materialized from the golden haze. The horseman moved with an easy grace, his silhouette dark against the brightening sky. As he drew closer, she could make out details. A bay horse with a white blaze, well cared for despite the trail dust, and a rider in worn leather chaps, and a hat pulled low against the Sunday. The stranger slowed his horse to a walk as he neared her property line, raising his hand in a gesture of peace. Sarah set down her paintbrush but kept her hand near the fence post, where Thomas's old Spencer rifle leaned within easy reach. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town, caution was survival. "Morning, ma'am," the rider called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. He pushed back his hat, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, with honest brown eyes and several days' worth of stubble. Sarah guessed him to be perhaps 35, maybe 40. It was hard to tell with men who lived under the open sky. "Name's Jake Coleman. I'm heading through to Laramie, looking for work. Couldn't help but notice your fence needs tending." Sarah studied him carefully. His clothes were worn but clean, his horse healthy, his saddle well maintained, all signs of a man who took pride in what little he had. Still, she'd learned to read men's intentions in their eyes, and Jake Coleman's held nothing but straightforward honesty and perhaps a hint of concern. "Sarah McKenzie," she replied, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "The fence has seen better days, Mr. Coleman, but I manage well enough on my own." Jake dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He ground-tied his horse and walked closer, his spurs making soft music with each step. "I don't doubt that, Mrs. McKenzie, but I've got 2 good hands and a few days to spare before I need to be in Laramie. I work for meals and a place to lay my bedroll. No charity, just honest trade." Sarah wanted to refuse. Every fiber of her independent spirit rebelled against accepting help from a stranger. But as she looked down the fence line, at least 100 posts, many needing to be reset, all needing paint, wire to be strung, she felt the weight of impossibility settling on her shoulders. The autumn gather was coming in 3 weeks. Without secure fencing, she'd never managed to sort her cattle from the open range herds. "I can't pay wages," she said finally, her voice steady despite the admission. "Best I can offer is meals and the use of the barn loft." Jake nodded, already rolling up his sleeves. "That's fair dealing, ma'am. Mind if I take a look at what we're working with?" He walked along the fence line, occasionally kneeling to examine a post, testing another with a firm shake, his experienced eye cataloging the work ahead. "You've got about 20 posts that need replacing entirely, another 30 that can be reset and braced. The rest just need paint and wire. It's maybe a week's work for 2 people working steady. 2 people? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Jake grinned, the expression transforming his weathered features. Well, I assumed you wouldn't be content to just watch, Mrs. McKenzie. You strike me as someone who pulls their own weight. Despite herself, Sarah felt the corner of her mouth twitch toward a smile. The first in months. You assume correctly, Mr. Coleman. But first, let me fix you breakfast. Can't have you working on an empty stomach. As they walked toward the house, Jake noticed the small cemetery plot on the hill behind the barn, the fresh grave marked with a wooden cross. He didn't comment, but his expression softened with understanding. In the kitchen, Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, frying bacon and eggs, warming yesterday's biscuits. Jake ate with quiet appreciation, using his biscuit to soak up every drop of egg yolk, savoring the simple meal like a feast. Been riding long? Sarah asked, refilling his coffee cup. Most of my life, Jake replied. Worked cattle from Texas to Montana, did a stint in the Army after the war, then drifted back to what I knew. Never found a place that felt like stopping, so I kept moving. There was a loneliness in his words that Sarah recognized, different from her own grief but familiar nonetheless. She understood the weight of empty horizons, the burden of having no one waiting at the end of the trail. They began work as the morning sun climbed higher, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Jake had unloaded tools from his saddlebags, a well-worn hammer, a small saw, and leather gloves patched and repatched but still serviceable. Sarah noticed how he handled each tool with respect, the way a craftsman treats instruments of his trade. The first task was setting the fallen posts. Jake showed Sarah how to dig around the base, creating a bowl that would hold the post steady once packed with rocks and earth. His hands guided hers on the post-hole digger, patient when she struggled with the weight of it, never condescending when she needed to rest. They worked in companionable silence, broken only by necessary communication and the occasional shared observation about the weather or the distant herd of antelope grazing on the rise. By noon, the sun beat down mercilessly. Sarah's dress was soaked with perspiration, her hands beginning to blister despite the gloves Jake had insisted she wear. She brought water from the well, and they sat in the meager shade of a cottonwood tree, passing the ladle between them. Jake pulled out a harmonica from his shirt pocket, playing a soft melody that seemed to make the heat more bearable. That's beautiful, Sarah said, surprising herself by speaking. What's it called? Shenandoah, Jake replied. Learned it from a fellow in Virginia, years back. Music helps pass the time on long trails. He offered her the harmonica. You play? Sarah shook her head. Thomas did. Fiddle, mostly. Used to play in the evenings while I mended clothes or worked on the ledgers. She paused, then added, I haven't heard music in the house since. Jake tucked the harmonica away, understanding the weight of unfinished sentences. We should get back to it, he said gently. Want to make good progress before the afternoon heat gets worse. They returned to the fence line, establishing a rhythm. Jake would set the post, Sarah would hold it steady while he packed the base. Then together they'd move to the next one, painting the repaired posts as they went. The white paint grew warm in the sun, its sharp scent mixing with the smell of turned earth and prairie grass. Sarah found herself stealing glances at Jake as he worked, noting the economy of his movements, the quiet competence that spoke of years of experience. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they heard horses approaching. Sarah tensed, but Jake seemed unconcerned, continuing to work until 3 riders came into view. They were Native Americans, northern Cheyenne by their dress, an older man and 2 younger ones, perhaps his sons. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward the house where the rifle waited, but Jake stood calmly, raising his hand in greeting. The older man, his face deeply lined and his hair streaked with gray, responded with a similar gesture. You are the woman alone, he said to Sarah in careful English. We have watched. Your man is gone to the spirit world. Sarah nodded, unsure how to respond. The Cheyenne had been peaceful in these parts for several years, but old fears died hard among the settlers. Jake stepped forward slightly, not threatening but clearly positioning himself as part of the household. I am Joseph Tallbear, the older man continued. These are my sons. We water our horses at Willow Creek, 2 valleys over. Your fence. He gestured at the broken line. Your cattle wander onto our path. We bring them back. He pointed to a small group of cattle grazing near the barn, Sarah's brand clear on their flanks. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. embarrassment mixing with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Tallbear. I apologize for the trouble. We're working to repair the fence now." Joseph Tallbear studied Jake with keen eyes, seeming to take his measure in a long, silent moment. "You are not her man," he observed. "Just a hired hand," Jake replied easily. "Helping out for a few days." The old Cheyenne nodded slowly, then surprised them both by dismounting. His sons followed suit. "We help," he announced. "Fence is good. Keeps your cattle from our horses from your cattle. Peace is good." Before Sarah could protest or accept, the 3 Cheyenne men had moved to the pile of fence posts Jake had gathered. The younger men were strong, carrying posts that would have taken Jake 2 trips to move. Joseph Tallbear examined the work already done, nodding approval at the solid placement and careful bracing. They worked together until sunset, an unlikely crew, a grieving widow, a drifting cowboy, and 3 Cheyenne warriors. Few words were exchanged, but a rhythm developed. The younger Cheyenne men dug holes with impressive speed. Jake and Joseph set posts, and Sarah followed with the paint bucket, marking each restored section of fence with bright white that would glow in the moonlight, warning cattle away. As darkness approached, Sarah insisted on preparing supper for everyone. The Cheyenne men sat outside, uncomfortable with entering the house, so she brought the meal to the porch: beans and salt pork, fresh bread she'd baked that morning, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Joseph Tallbear ate slowly, thoughtfully, while his sons wolfed down their portions with the appetite of young men who'd worked hard. "Your man," Joseph said to Sarah as they ate. "He was good man. Fair. When our young ones took sick 2 winters past, he brought medicine from town. Did not ask payment." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Thomas believed in being neighborly," she managed. "Good belief." Joseph nodded. He looked at Jake. "You have this belief?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I try to, sir. Man helps where he can, world's a better place for it." The old Cheyenne smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "Tomorrow we come again. Fence will be strong." He stood, his sons rising with him. "Woman alone is not good, but woman with friends, with neighbors. This is good." After they left, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch in the gathering darkness. The painted fence posts stood out like sentinels in the moonlight, a line of white guards protecting what remained of her world. Jake played his harmonica softly, the melody drifting across the prairie like a prayer. "They're good people," Jake said after a while. "The Cheyenne. Met plenty in my travels. They judge a person by their actions, not their words or the color of their skin." Sarah wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thomas always said the same. He never had trouble with them, even when other ranchers were complaining. Respect given is respect earned, he used to say." "Wise man," Jake observed. "He was," Sarah agreed, and for the first time, speaking of Thomas in the past tense didn't feel like swallowing broken glass. The next morning brought clouds rolling in from the mountains, promising rain but not yet delivering. Joseph Tallbear and his sons arrived as the sun broke the horizon, bringing with them something unexpected: 2 more Cheyenne men and a travois loaded with straight, sturdy posts they'd cut from lodgepole pines in the high country. "For the corners," Joseph explained. "Mountain wood is strong. Will not rot like cottonwood." Sarah was overwhelmed by the generosity. I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks," Joseph said firmly. "This is the way. We help, you help. Circle continues." With 7 people working, the fence repair progressed at an astounding pace. The Cheyenne men began singing as they worked, a rhythmic chant that seemed to make the labor lighter. Jake picked up the rhythm, driving posts in time with the song. Sarah found herself humming along as she painted, the brush moving in steady strokes to the ancient beat. At midday, when Sarah brought out lunch, one of Joseph's sons, the younger one called Samuel, shyly produced a small wooden flute. As they ate, he played a haunting melody that seemed to capture the essence of the prairie, its loneliness and its beauty, its hardships and its rewards. Jake accompanied him on the harmonica, the 2 instruments weaving together in unexpected harmony. "My son learns the old songs," Joseph explained with pride, "but also makes new ones. This song, he makes for his woman. They marry when the leaves turn." Sarah smiled at the young man's embarrassment. "It's beautiful, Samuel. She's a lucky woman." The work continued through the afternoon, but now there was laughter mixed with the labor. Jake told stories of cattle drives gone wrong, of rivers crossed in flood and stampedes under lightning-split skies. Joseph's older son, called Robert, shared tales of hunting buffalo in the days before the great herds disappeared. Even Sarah found herself recounting the time she and Thomas had to deliver a neighbor's baby when the doctor was too drunk to ride. As they worked, Jake noticed Sarah favoring her right hand. Without making a fuss, he took the paint bucket from her. "Let me spell you for a while," he said quietly. "You've been at it steady all day." Sarah started to protest, then saw the blisters that had formed despite the gloves. Jake produced a small tin of salve from his saddlebag. "Here," he said, his voice gruff. "It'll help with the healing." His fingers were gentle as he helped her apply the salve, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight grip grief had held on her heart. It wasn't attraction, not yet, but rather a recognition of kindness, of care offered without expectation of return. That evening, as the Cheyenne prepared to leave, Joseph Tallbear pulled Sarah aside. "The cowboy," he said quietly. "He is good man. I see how he watches, not with hunger, but with respect. My people, we know the look of men who take and men who give. This one gives." Sarah felt color rise to her cheeks. "He's just passing through. He'll be gone to Laramie once the fence is done." Joseph smiled knowingly. Maybe, maybe not. Prairie has way of holding people who belong. He mounted his horse with surprising agility for his age. "Tomorrow we finish. Then we feast. You come to our camp. Bring the cowboy." As the Cheyenne rode away, Jake stood beside Sarah, watching their silhouettes disappear into the dusk. "Good folks," he said simply. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Thomas always said we were lucky to have them as neighbors." I'm beginning to understand how right he was. That night, the promised rain arrived, a gentle soaking that would bring the last growth of grass before winter. Sarah lay in her bed, listening to it drum on the roof, a sound that had always comforted her. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake moving in the barn loft, probably checking for leaks to protect his gear. The knowledge that someone else was on the property, that she wasn't entirely alone, brought an unexpected peace. Unable to sleep, she rose and made her way to the kitchen, lighting a lamp against the darkness. Through the window, she could see a faint light in the barn. Jake was awake too. On impulse, she put on Thomas's old slicker and walked across the yard, the rain cool against her face. She found Jake sitting in the barn door, watching the rain fall on the prairie. He'd built a small fire in an old bucket, its warmth pushing back the damp chill. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, making room for her to sit. "The rain always makes me restless," Sarah admitted, settling beside him. "Thomas used to say it was because I was part cat, hating to get wet but curious about everything." Jake chuckled. "My mother said something similar about me, said I had too much wonder in me to ever settle proper." He paused, then added, "She was probably right." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the rain silver the grass and turn the dirt to mud. Finally, Sarah asked the question that had been building all day. "Why did you really stop, Jake? There are dozens of ranches between here and Laramie, most offering paying work." Jake was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I saw you out there with that paint bucket," he finally said. "One person trying to hold together what two people built. It reminded me of my mother after my father died. She tried so hard to keep our small farm going, but she didn't have to do it alone. Neighbors came, helped her through until my brother and I were old enough to take over. I thought maybe I could pass along that kindness." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "And when the fence is done, will you really go on to Laramie?" "That depends," Jake said carefully, "on whether there's reason to stay." The weight of his words hung between them like the rain itself, full of possibility, of potential for growth or destruction. Sarah wasn't ready to answer, wasn't sure what answer she would give if she was ready, but she found herself leaning slightly toward his warmth, and when his hand covered hers where it rested on the hay, she didn't pull away. "Tomorrow we finish the fence," she said softly. "Tomorrow we finish the fence," he agreed. Morning came gray and misty, the rain having passed in the night, leaving the world washed clean. The work crew assembled early, Jake and Sarah, Joseph Tallbear and his sons, and now 3 more Cheyenne women, including Joseph's wife, a sturdy woman named Mary who immediately took charge of organizing everyone. "Men work, women cook," she announced, then winked at Sarah. "But first, women also work. Fence first, Then feast. The final push was almost festive. With so many hands, the remaining posts went up quickly. The Cheyenne women proved as capable as the men, stringing wire with practiced efficiency while singing songs that made the work feel like celebration. Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in months as Mary told embarrassing stories about Joseph's courtship years ago. The old warrior trying to maintain his dignity while his wife revealed how he'd once fallen off his horse trying to impress her. By early afternoon, they were down to the last section, the final 10 posts that would complete the circuit of Sarah's property. Jake insisted Sarah paint the very last post, and as she lifted the brush, everyone gathered around. The white paint went on smooth and even, each stroke marking not just the wood but the completion of something larger, a community effort, a bridging of cultures, a healing of sorts. "It's done," Sarah said, stepping back to survey their work. The fence stretched clean and strong into the distance, every post painted white and standing true. The wire taut and properly stretched. "No," Joseph Tallbear corrected gently. "It begins. Good fences make good neighbors, but better neighbors make good friends." The feast at the Cheyenne camp was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The women had prepared venison and wild root vegetables, fry bread, and a sweet pudding made from choke cherries. Someone had brought out drums, and as the afternoon wore on, the music grew livelier. Samuel played his flute while Robert sang, their voices carrying across the prairie. Jake was pulled into a traditional dance by the younger men, his initial awkwardness giving way to genuine enjoyment as he learned the steps. Sarah watched from her seat beside Mary, feeling lighter than she had in months. When Mary's granddaughter, a tiny girl of perhaps 4 years, climbed into Sarah's lap, she felt the ice around her heart crack a little more. "You have no children," Mary observed, not a question but a gentle acknowledgement. "Not yet," Sarah replied, then caught herself. "I mean, no, Thomas and I. We tried, but it never happened." Mary patted her hand. "Sometimes the spirits wait for the right moment. Sometimes they wait for the right father." As evening approached and Sarah and Jake prepared to leave, Joseph Tallbear took Jake aside. From her distance, Sarah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Jake nod solemnly, then shake the older man's hand with obvious respect. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The painted fence posts glowed in the setting sun, creating a barrier that somehow seemed less about keeping things apart and more about defining what was worth protecting. At the house, Jake helped Sarah down from the wagon they'd borrowed from the Cheyenne. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Sarah found herself reluctant to step away. "What did Joseph say to you?" she asked. Jake seemed to consider his words carefully. He said that a man who helps repair a fence should consider what he's helping to fence in or fence out. He said sometimes the most important fences are the ones we build around our hearts, and sometimes the bravest thing is to take them down. Sarah's breath caught. "And what did you say?" "I said I was starting to think some fences were worth maintaining, if a man was invited to stay inside them." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. Sarah knew she stood at a crossroads. She could retreat to the safety of her grief, or she could take a step toward something new, something uncertain but alive with potential. "There's still work to be done," she said finally. "The barn needs repairs before winter, and I'll need help with the autumn gather." "I'm good with barn repairs," Jake said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And I've worked my share of gathers." "The pay still won't be much," Sarah warned. "I wasn't thinking about pay," Jake replied softly. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. She found Jake on the barn roof, already replacing damaged shingles. He'd risen before dawn, she realized, and had coffee already made when she entered the kitchen. It was strong and black, the way Thomas had liked it, but somehow it didn't feel like a betrayal to drink it. They fell into a routine over the following days. Jake worked on the barn while Sarah tended to the household chores and the vegetable garden that had gone wild in her months of grief. In the evenings, they ate together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. Jake would play his harmonica, or they would sit in comfortable silence, each aware of the other but not yet ready to bridge the final distance between them. One evening, a week after the fence was completed, Jake surprised her by producing a fiddle from his saddlebags. "Traded for it in town today when I went for supplies," he explained. Thought maybe the house could use some music again." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Jake played tentatively at first, simple melodies that seemed to test the boundaries of what was acceptable. When Sarah didn't protest, he grew bolder, playing livelier tunes that had her toes tapping despite herself. Thomas loved Red River Valley, she said suddenly. Could you play that? Jake nodded and began the familiar melody. Sarah's voice, unused to singing for so long, joined in shakily at first, then stronger. They sang together in the darkness, two lonely souls finding harmony in an old song about love and leaving. When the song ended, Sarah was crying openly. Jake set aside the fiddle and moved to comfort her, but stopped, uncertain. Sarah made the decision for him, stepping into his arms and letting herself be held for the first time since Thomas's death. Jake's embrace was strong but gentle, asking nothing, offering everything. I'm scared, she whispered against his chest. Of what? He asked softly. Of forgetting him, of moving on, of not moving on, of being alone, of not being alone. The words tumbled out in a rush. Jake pulled back enough to look into her eyes. You won't forget him, Sarah. Love like that doesn't disappear. It just makes room for more, if you let it. That night, Sarah gave Jake a proper bed in the spare room instead of the barn loft. It was a small step, but a significant one. The house felt less empty with him under its roof, less haunted by memories and more filled with possibility. The autumn gather began 3 days later. Cowboys from neighboring ranches arrived to help sort the cattle that had mixed together on the open range over the summer. It was hard work, dusty and dangerous, but necessary. Sarah watched Jake work with a new appreciation for his skill. He had a way with cattle, understanding their movements, anticipating their reactions. The other cowboys clearly respected him, following his lead without question. But it was his interaction with a young cowboy, barely 16 and green as spring grass, that truly captured Sarah's heart. The boy made a mistake that scattered a group of sorted cattle, mixing them back with the main herd. The other hands cursed and complained, but Jake simply rode over to the mortified youth. We've all done it, son, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Man who says he hasn't is either lying or hasn't worked cattle long enough. Come on, I'll show you a trick for keeping them settled. That evening, after the other cowboys had returned to their own ranches, Jake and Sarah sat on the porch, counting the day's tally. They'd recovered all of Sarah's cattle plus a few strays that would need to be returned to other brands. The fence had held perfectly, the white posts visible even in the dust, keeping the sorted cattle secure. You're good with people, Sarah observed. That boy will remember your kindness forever. Jake shrugged. Someone did the same for me once. Figure it's only right to pass it on. Sarah made a decision then, one that had been building since the night they'd sung together. Jake, I need to know something. What are you really looking for? You talk about Laramie, about moving on, but you're still here. Jake set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. I thought I was looking for work, he said slowly. Maybe a place to winter. But Sarah, I think I've been looking for home without knowing it. And the more time I spend here, the more I think maybe I've found it. This ranch is hard work, Sarah said, her heart pounding. And I'm not easy to live with. I have dark days still, days when grief feels like it might swallow me whole. I'm not looking for easy, Jake replied. And as for the dark days, maybe they're not so dark when you don't face them alone. Sarah stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the fence line glowing white in the moonlight. Thomas built this place from nothing. Every board, every post, has his mark on it. Jake joined her at the railing, standing close but not touching. That's what makes it worth protecting, worth continuing. Not replacing what was, but building on it. The other ranchers will talk, Sarah said, a widow taking up with a drifter before her husband's been gone a year. Let them talk, Jake said firmly. The people who matter, like Joseph Tallbear and his family, they see the truth of things. Sarah turned to face him then, seeing in his eyes not just desire but something deeper, commitment, patience, a willingness to wait for her to be ready. If you stay, she said, carefully, it can't be as a hired hand. What would it be as? Jake asked, though his eyes said he already knew. As a partner, Sarah said, in the ranch, in the work, in everything. But Jake, I need time. I'm not ready for everything. That means, not yet. Jake took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle. Sarah McKenzie, I've been drifting for 15 years. I can wait as long as you need. Just tell me there's hope. There's hope, Sarah whispered, and felt the truth of it in her bones. The first snow came early that year. October bringing a sudden storm that blanketed the prairie in white. Jake and Sarah worked side by side preparing for winter, cutting firewood, reinforcing the barn, ensuring the cattle had adequate shelter. The painted fence posts stood out even more starkly against the snow, guardians in the white expanse. Joseph Tallbear visited one last time before his band moved to their winter camps. He brought a gift, a beautiful blanket woven with traditional patterns. "For your home," he said, including both Sarah and Jake in his gaze. "May it warm you through the cold times ahead." As winter deepened, the ranch became a small island of warmth in the frozen prairie. Jake had moved fully into the house, though he maintained careful propriety, always respectful of Sarah's need for time and space. They developed a partnership that went beyond mere cooperation, anticipating each other's needs, working in harmony that made the hard tasks manageable. Christmas Eve arrived with a blizzard that shut out the world beyond the ranch. Sarah and Jake sat by the fire, the wind howling outside but unable to penetrate the warmth they'd created together. Jake had carved a small wooden angel for the top of the modest tree they'd cut, and Sarah had baked Thomas's mother's recipe for gingerbread cookies. "I have something for you," Jake said, producing a small wrapped package. Sarah opened it to find a new paintbrush, its handle carved with delicate flowers. "For the fence," Jake explained. "Come spring, we'll need to touch up the paint." "We," Sarah repeated, the word carrying weight. "If that's still what you want," Jake said carefully. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The fence posts were barely visible through the blowing snow, but she knew they were there, standing strong against the storm. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd built, of the dreams they'd shared. Then she thought of Jake, of his patience and kindness, of the way he'd helped her not just repair the fence but begin to repair her heart. "Thomas would have liked you," she said finally. "I would have liked him," Jake replied. "Any man who could inspire such loyalty, such love, must have been something special." Sarah turned from the window and crossed to where Jake Saturday. "I'll always love him," she said. "That won't change." "I wouldn't want it to," Jake said. "That love is part of who you are." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the last of her resistance crumble like old fence posts finally giving way. "But I know. There's room for more." She leaned down and kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Jake's arms came around her, gentle but sure, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd almost forgotten its name: joy. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a celebration. Jake and Sarah were married in the small church in town, with Joseph Tallbear and his family among the witnesses. The ceremony was simple, but the joy was profound. The ranchers who had whispered through the winter were silenced by the obvious rightness of the match, the way Sarah bloomed under Jake's care, the way the ranch thrived under their joint management. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch to find a surprise. The entire fence line had been decorated with wildflowers by the Cheyenne women, each white post adorned with prairie roses and Indian paintbrush. It was, Mary Tallbear explained, a blessing on their union and their land. That evening, as the sun set over the prairie, Jake and Sarah stood together at the last fence post, the one Sarah had painted on that final day of repair. Jake had added something to it without her knowing, a small heart carved into the wood, with their initials and the date. "When did you do this?" Sarah asked, tracing the carving with her finger. "The day I knew I loved you," Jake replied. "The day you trusted me enough to cry in my arms." Sarah leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the promise of a future built on the foundation of the past but reaching toward something new. "We'll need to repaint soon," she observed, noting how the winter had weathered the white paint. "We will," Jake agreed. "Every year, every season if needed. That's what you do with something worth preserving. You tend it, maintain it, never take it for granted." As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Sarah looked back at the fence line one more time. Each post stood as a testament not just to physical labor but to the power of community, the strength found in accepting help, and the courage required to open one's heart again after loss. The fence that had once seemed like an impossible burden had become the instrument of her salvation, bringing her not just Jake, but a deeper connection to her neighbors and to the land itself. 5 years later, Sarah stood at that same last fence post, this time with a toddler on her hip, their daughter, Emma, named for Jake's mother. Jake was teaching their son, Thomas, barely 3 years old, how to hold a paintbrush. The boy's chubby fingers struggled with the handle, more paint ending up on his clothes than the fence, but his determination was evident. Gentle strokes, Jake said patiently, his hand guiding the boys. The fence takes care of us, so we take care of the fence. Joseph Tallbear, now even more gray but still strong, watched from horseback with his grandson, Samuel's boy. The two peoples had become more than neighbors over the years. They were family in all the ways that mattered. Their children played together, their families celebrated together, their communities supported each other through drought and plenty alike. The fence is strong, Joseph observed, testing a post that had been set that first day of working together. Like the friendship it helped build. Sarah smiled, shifting Emma to her other hip. It's more than a fence now, she said. It's our story. And it was. Every post held a memory. The one where Jake had first taken her hand. The one near where they'd shared their first kiss. The corner post they'd reset the day before Emma was born. Jake working frantically to finish before racing Sarah to town. The fence had become a timeline of their life together. Painted and repainted with love. Each fresh coat of white not covering the past but protecting it, preserving it. As the sun set that day, painting the prairie in shades of gold and rose, the McKenzie Coleman family, for Sarah had insisted on keeping Thomas's name as part of their legacy, gathered on the porch. Jake played his fiddle while Sarah sang, their children dancing with uncoordinated joy. The painted fence posts stood sentinel in the gathering dusk, glowing like a string of pearls across the landscape. Tell us the story again, Mama, young Thomas demanded, climbing into Sarah's lap. About the fence, and how Papa came. Sarah began the tale, as she had so many times before, of a widow with a broken fence and a broken heart, of a drifting cowboy looking for purpose, and of Cheyenne neighbors who taught them that the strongest fences are built by community, not individuals. She told of that last fence post, painted with hope and sealed with love. And they lived happily ever after? Emma asked. Though she knew the answer, Sarah looked at Jake, saw her love reflected in his eyes, felt the weight of their children against her, heard the evening songs of the prairie birds settling for the night. No, she said, surprising them all. They lived truly ever after. Happily came and went like the seasons, but truly, loving truly, living truly, being truly together. That was constant as fence posts, strong as the paint that protected them, enduring as the prairie itself. Jake reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that had never quite faded, marks of the work they'd done together. Every last post, he said softly, their private promise to each other. Every last post, Sarah agreed, and in the distance, the white fence glowed in the last light of day, complete and unbroken, a testament to the truth that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with grand gestures, but with simple acts of kindness, like helping a stranger paint a fence, one post at a time, until the last post becomes not an ending but a beginning of something beautiful and enduring. The prairie wind carried their laughter across the range, past the Cheyenne camp where Joseph Tallbear smiled at the sound, over the hills where other ranchers were settling in for the night, and along the fence line where each painted post stood as a witness to the power of love, to heal, to transform, and to build something lasting from the broken pieces of what came before.